Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
Hello, everyone. Tracy here. Welcome back to another episode. I am so thankful to have you joining me for another fantastic conversation. But before we dive right in, a quick word from this week's sponsor. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Impact Farming Show. I have a very special guest on, and I'm excited to welcome Merle Massie to the show. Merle, how are you doing?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited to have you finally. As we were saying before we got on camera, there's so many great people in the industry, and I'm like, Merle, I gotta bring her on. And then we just ebbed and flow, and in perfect timing, we are here. For those of you maybe that haven't seen Merle, haven't heard her name, she is the executive director for Do More Ag, and such an important cause, association, and you guys are always doing good work. So I'm so happy to have you on. Merle, we're going to have a good conversation. I know you are passionate about the subject, about the work you do. You got a farming background. Why don't you share more about who you are and what you do, and then we'll just roll.
Absolutely. I'd love to. So for those who've not met me, Merle Massie. I'm a farmer in West Central Saskatchewan. So we farm between Bigger and Rosetown, my husband and I. We farm with his two brothers and his mom and dad. So we have 4 businesses, but we run one line of equipment. We work together and look after one another. But I grew up in Saskatchewan on the forest edge. So north of Prince Albert, where you had to cut down the trees to make the farm. That's the area where I grew up. And my path into farming was a little bit roundabout. Even though I grew up on a farm, I've always been connected to a farm. When I went to university, I loved to write and read and tell stories. And so my degree is actually in history. So I'm a Western Canadian historian, a published historian, and I study rural and agricultural and health history. And so that was an interesting segue into the work that I do at Do More, because I bring that storytelling eye. It's really about making sure that people feel seen and heard and welcome, and that they belong in this larger story of mental health, and finding ways to creatively raise the story of mental health so that it becomes a more solid and recognizable part of our part of agriculture.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Okay. So I know, anybody in this audience, I don't think we need to do the tell me more about Do More Ag, but you know what? There might be somebody. So do you want to share a little bit more about the organization, the background, and then the programs? And then I want to get into mental health and your story a little bit deeper.
Now that sounds great. Yes. So for those who don't know, the Do More Agriculture Foundation was founded here in Western Canada by farmers for farmers in 2017. And it was awarded its National Charitable Foundation status in 2019. And so I start with that because this is about farmers talking to farmers and saying, hey, we've got to do more. There was actually a viral tweet string that said that we've got to do more. It came from Kim Keller, and it went viral. And Leslie Kelly was also doing some work at the same time. They were both original co-founders, along with 2 others of the Do More Agriculture Foundation, and they bootstrapped and grew it right from nothing, right from nowhere to where we are today, and we're so grateful. So I'm the 3rd executive director to take the reins. Although I watched it, the creation. I was following that original tweet string. I was cheering from the sidelines, supporting as hard as I could, but we had our own story going on at our farm and in our personal lives, and it just wasn't an appropriate time for me to sort of step forward and I was part of the advisory committee, the farmer advisory committee, for some work that they did, but when they were looking around for a new executive director, it happened to dovetail with, all right, yes, I'm ready. I would love to join in. In terms of what we do, The biggest piece that we do is actually thought leadership. It may sound simple, especially because people say, oh, people talk about mental health nowadays, all the time.
Yeah.
And we do. What I want to remind people is where we're coming from, right? Because we are coming from a culture. I grew up in Western Canada in the 70s and 80s. We did not talk about this at all. That was behind closed doors. It was behind your hands. It was in whispers. It was a shameful, fearful conversation. It was not part of regular everyday support or conversation. And it takes a concerted effort to break through that, because we do still see it and we do still hear it. People say, oh yeah, we talk about mental health all the time. And I'm like, great, we're going to be in your community leading a workshop, all about this next Tuesday. I'll see you at 10 a.m. They're like, no. I'm fine. I know other people who need that, but I'm fine, right? I don't know how many times I hear that sort of thing. And so I remind people that really standing up and opening that conversation and having that conversation about mental health has been a huge play. And I love to see it across the agriculture community. I'm so proud that farmers stood up and said, no more. No more farmers that we lose. No more hiding this in the shadows. We need to stand up and make some waves and make some change. And so that's a big part of what we do. We do go out to rural communities. They can apply to us through our community fund, which should be open by the time this airs, and apply to us for funding to host a workshop in your community. And those workshops are all about activating community. It's about conversation, communication, and community. That's what they're about. They're called Talk, Ask, Listen. And we're really excited to bring our refreshed work to the table. We have a suite of other programs as well. Really, the best way to understand Do More Ag is we have 3 pillars. Action for awareness. So the things that we do to make sure that we continue to talk and break down those barriers so that people will not just sit behind their house and try and tough it out, but get brave enough to go and get help, brave enough to talk about it with their friends, their neighbors, their family, gauge what's actually happening and talk about it. So action for awareness, community for connection and belonging, to make sure that we're activating, yes, the clinical side. We always like to make sure that clinicians are readily available and involved. Do More Ag does good work in helping clinicians to better understand agriculture. We want to make sure that there are call lines in place. We support when those pieces are there. We also know that in between going to the clinic, calling a call line just when you're first realizing that something's going on, we want more people across every rural community across Canada to be willing to have those conversations with their family, with their friends, with their neighbors, so that the whole culture, I don't have a problem talking to my friend about her triple negative breast cancer, right? And reaching out and knowing that the community is out there and wrapping her in support and helping her. None of us know anything about treating what she has, right? But we don't need to. We're there to help and support her. So when we can activate community in those ways, we know that we can activate community to help someone who's going through a mental health challenge, right? So that's the best way. And the third way is the resources. So it isn't that Do More Ag, so that's our third pillar, but it isn't that Do More Ag is necessarily providing all of those resources. Health, of course, is still provincial. We need to make sure that we've got clinicians and call lines, and we've got technical support in place, that, and doctors and rural hospitals and all of those things that are in place, right? But we want to make sure that people know those resources exist, that hope is out there, that there are much better solutions than there were in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, that there is hope, there is relief, and that to help guide people to where they need to go next.
Oh, I love it. Excellent explanation. Question for you. Do you remember the year that Do More Ag was formed? Do you know?
Yeah, 2017.
2017. Okay.
Yeah. And then national charitable status in 2019.
Okay, I started this show in 2018, so that makes sense because I was watching it too. That original tweet, and then Leslie and Kim, and then it becoming a thing. It was fascinating to watch. I love what you said because you hit on a narrative that is very common, and you just made me have like one of those moments. Lately, you hear a lot of people, especially on social media, go, "Oh my God, all we do is talk about about mental health." And then lately, I've been like, "Is there are these episodes I do valuable? Because everybody seems over it, right? But bear with me, when you said that it is so commonplace and we're so accepting of the fact that we talk about mental health, wow, right there. Like that's
Yes,
the win. I
that
didn't
is
even
the win.
realize that, right? Because before that tweet and before that beautiful group started Do More Egg, it was like, we can't talk about it. Now everybody's so sick of hearing it. It's commonplace. Sorry to use that strong
No,
wording, right?
it is strong wording, but at the same time, it's interesting.
It's
Those of us who are kind of
fantastic.
in media and social media,
Yeah,
especially once you've read one tweet or whatever, or you've liked something that's mental health, all of a sudden your algorithm is full of it, right? And so
yes,
you think, oh my gosh, it's everywhere.
yeah.
But I still come across all kinds of people who come up to us after we've presented, let's say at a conference. We're so glad that you're doing the work that you're doing. Keep going. We know that there are still yet more people that haven't heard, that aren't really a part of this, that haven't yet realized that this could help what's happening with them. And so this isn't the time to stop. This is the time to dig deeper.
Yeah, I like it. One of my frustrations, but understanding, I don't get a lot of engagement on my posts. And a lot of them are succession episodes, and a lot of them are mental health. But I'm like, really, what are people going to put in the comments? Yes, I'm struggling, and we would hope they would do that. And please do if you want to. But I think so much of the impact that we make is quiet, exactly like you said. Nobody's going around saying, I love these episodes, but I've had people message me quietly in my inbox and say, thank you for doing this because XYZ. But
Yeah.
nobody puts it in the comment box because nobody's comfortable. That's nobody's business, right? They think it. You
Yeah,
want
so I would love to pick this up and run with it in
please?
two different ways. So I'm part of a number of agricultural groups on Facebook. And now that Facebook has the ability to allow people to comment anonymously, I'm seeing a specific rise in people posting around their mental health issues or their farm stress and maybe it's something about their relationships. I'm seeing a huge rise in that. And the reason why I wanted to frame that is because one of the programs that I didn't talk about specifically that we have at the Do More Agriculture Foundation is called AgTalk. And we created that specifically for those of us who aren't yet comfortable talking about mental health with our family, with our friends, with our neighbors. We're so concerned, right? We've heard people, that mental health crap, I'm so tired of it, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
whatever, or they,
totally, totally. Yeah.
oh, you have a mental, what are you talking to yourself? Like
Yes.
just
Yeah.
making a joke out of it, right? Which happens all the time. But Ag Talk, and please go on to domore.ag and you'll find the link down there under find support. And there's a link for Ag Talk. It's online. It's 24/7. It's hosted on the site Together All. It's completely anonymous. You do have to register. So you register. And so Together All knows who you are when you register. But you get like an anonymous name once you're on there. And what we know is that the number of people who are on there logging in after 5 o'clock until 9 o'clock in the next morning, 75% of our interactions are in that evening space. And
Mm,
25% of the interactions for those who've joined Ag Talk are after midnight. So this is when the doctor's office is closed. The therapist is not available, right? And maybe you can't, it's dark, it's quiet in your house. You can't pick up your phone and talk to someone. You can't call a call line. What do you do? Where do you go? Ag Talk is all text. You just go on there. You can read what other people have posted. You can post something yourself. Almost half of the people who've joined Ag Talk said that they've posted something on Ag Talk that they've never shared with anyone else. And here's another stat, Tracy. 75% of them are not accessing any kind of mental health support.
wow. There you go. There you go. It's powerful. It's funny you say that though, because I'm huge on mindset, mental health, and physical health. And to me, I have a lot of questions and I'm deeply curious, which I think makes me great for a show, right? Because I like to bring on people and pick their brain. Sometimes I hold back, but there's so much I wonder about mental health. And part of me goes, okay, mental health and mental illness. And you may have heard me say this. I've asked another guest about this. Oh, goodness, I'm like 4 questions down, but I'm deeply curious. I might save that one. Where I want to go on the time is where you're saying people are logging in onto those chats later in the day. I get it because I find my general energy. You wake up, you're enthusiastic, you're happy, the daylight's there, the sun makes you happy, just on a normal scale of mental health, happiness, right? You go through the day and then your energy burns off. You get to the end of the day, you eat supper, you finally have a quiet moment. Sorry, I have something in my throat. People probably go to bed. I think it's in the evening when it's dark. I've heard it say that that is often when loneliness, mental health hits the darkness, the quietness, the lateness, the tiredness, the stress of the day hits the evening. So that's amazing that you said that. That doesn't surprise me.
Me neither.
Hmm.
No, absolutely. The other piece that we so when it comes to mental health and mental illness, it's a little bit funny because of course mental health is all of us. We all need to have mental health. We
Yes.
all need to
Yeah.
work on our mental health. We all need to be intentional about what we're doing. We need to feed ourselves good stuff. You know, if you're just going to be, reading really negative stuff all the time, you're getting, you're going to
Yes.
whatever you feed yourself, that's what you're growing inside you, right? So you need to be intentional about these things. And that's all true for mental health. I don't want to lose the fact
Yeah.
that there is mental illness, right? 1 in 5 people will develop an illness that lasts for maybe a short period of time or a longer period of time through sometime throughout their lifetime. 1 in 5 of us. So a family of 5 on a farm, chances are really high that one of those people on that farm is going to develop an illness that is completely irrespective. They could be a very successful farm, a very successful ranch, and they still end up with somebody who ends up with an illness. And some of those illnesses, depending on the nature of it, they can erupt and be something that actually takes a hold of them and takes a long time to really work through, or it's something that they live with for a long time, like depression, like anxiety, like bipolar disorder, like schizophrenia. These are illnesses that people can develop. Farm safety is a big one, right? So anyone who's been through a farm safety incident, there's probably going to be people across that farm who are impacted with PTSD, not just the person who was hurt, but everyone who went to rescue them and help them, right? So there are real risks. And of course, here's another piece that people sometimes forget, and that is that if you live rural, you already have more problematic health outcomes than someone who lives in the city.
Mm.
Living rural is what they call a social determinant of health. It actually has an impact on how long you live, how much your risk levels are higher for all kinds of different things, such as accidents, and various other things. So living rural is actually a determinant of health, and then being on a farm is another level above that.
Interesting. Okay, I'm deeply curious. I know more is going to come up, but I want you to share, if you're okay with it, your personal story. You have a connection and this has impacted your family and you personally. Do you mind sharing?
I don't mind at all. So this is a story that came to us a little bit later on in my dad's life, but I grew up in the 1970s and 1980s. My dad was a farmer and he was the Breve of our rural municipality in Saskatchewan. And he was a larger than life, volatile kind of a person, right? Really well known, well loved, all of those sorts of things. But we saw the impact at the farm level, right? We could tell the difference between dad not doing well and only managing just to hold on to sort of a smaller level of farming and cows and so on and so forth. And then all of a sudden ramping up, and all of a sudden we had 200 cows for one guy to try and manage, right? And all of us trying to chip in, my 3 older brothers and I and my mom, trying to chip in and help and help support. And so that volatility, well, eventually, actually in the last year of his life, it became very, very clear what was going on. My dad had bipolar disorder, and he had. I often think about it, and I think about what his life would have been like, and what our farm would have been like had we had, good supports, had we had the better medicine, the better recognition from the clinician side, the better recognition from the community side of what we could do to support him. Because of course he was self-medicating. He was an alcoholic, right? And which now we know, like, oh, that's what that was, but at the time, we just knew that we had a problem. The other piece with that is that bipolar disorder runs through your family, right? And so my middle brother David also developed bipolar disorder, and his version of it was a little bit different than Dad's. Dad had what I would call a milder version. His was more episodic, like he could have several years and be quite fine, and then things would be more problematic. My brother David's was he would have a manic episode usually every spring and every fall. You couldn't necessarily set your clock by it, but you were pretty sure that you knew what was coming. And he was an absolute delight. He had the best laugh. He was so generous. He was he went to Haileybury School of Mines in Ontario for 2 years and got his mining engineer ticket. And he was working up at Flin Flon, making lots of money working up in the mine. This is in the 1990s when I was going to university, and I wanted to go to summer school and like what they called intersession and summer session. And at the time, we didn't have a lot of money in the house. David, he's like, well, I've got money. And he wrote the check to USask, and I, was able to take those classes, right? Like he thought nothing of an incredibly generous, over the top guy. He also had all of the risk factors, right? He was unmarried, right? Single, no children. He had an illness that was quite severe and difficult to manage. He wasn't really happy about managing it, right? The medication made him feel a particular way. He preferred not to take it, which was fine sometimes and not fine other times, right? So, I want to be real and truthful about that. He was living at the farm. My dad had died just the year before of cancer, and we'd been through a lot with that because Dad had actually the cancer actually caused a massive manic event for my dad. He was in the hospital for more than a month in the psychiatric ward the year that he died. And so we had a lot that we're still processing as a family. And David decided that he didn't want to do that anymore. And he chose to take his life, and he died by suicide at the farm.
Wow. Whew.
It's a big story. And I apologize to all who might not have been expecting that. I do want to frame one piece, Tracy, that's important. When you take a look at suicide, one of the most common things that I hear people say is, oh, you got to watch for the signs, right? And there are signs. Sometimes there are signs. But most of the time is that you don't see those signs, or you don't really recognize them for what they are until after the fact. What my mom and I found, as we walked through that very difficult grieving period and the loss of my brother, is that when we understood the risk factors that my brother David had, being, in his early 40s, living on the farm, access to lethal means. He had a mental illness that wasn't particularly well managed. He wasn't married. He had no kids. We had been through a recent, grief event. We had lost Dad the year before. So his whole world and situation at the farm was very different than it had been in all the years leading up to it, right? Because Dad was no longer there. And so, sort of the lodestar of David's life was no longer there. You add all of those risk factors up together, and you get a much different picture, and you understand that there were things that we couldn't necessarily make changes on or necessarily notice. That it wasn't so much signs, it was risk factors. And I do want to say this because it's important. If anyone's watching this and they've also been on the other side of a story like mine, and someone important to them, that they've lost them from suicide, it can send you down a really hard path. People can really beat themselves up. I missed the signs. I missed the signs. I missed the signs. Well, if you can think back to, well, what were their risk factors? What were that person's risk factors? And does that help you see this story a little bit differently? It might help.
Thank you for sharing. I seen you post and again, I can't remember if you commented on one of my mental health, if you were in a discussion with somebody, or if it was one of your own posts and you shared that. And I have since that moment been wanting to get you on the show to share that, because to me, it's let's rip the Band-Aid off. I care deeply about everybody in our audience. And I think by saying the truth, saying these things, it is so helpful for people in the audience, right?
I hope so. I hope so.
Whether they're worried about somebody, whether they're not even thinking about it, or whether they're on the other side, like you said, going, coulda, shoulda, woulda, right? Because that's not helpful for anybody either.
It's not. It's painful.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. I can see why you are so passionate about this work, and I can see it in you in the way that you communicate. So I love when people are doing work that is so perfect for their story and their passion, and it comes through. So I just wanted to note that. You know, when you were saying your story before, when you seen Do More Egg happening and you're like, that wasn't a good time. In my mind, I'm huge. This sounds a little woo-woo, little mystical, but I'm huge on like divine timing. Like things happen. I have found looking back, maybe I wanted something to happen 10 years ago, but it wasn't time. I wasn't ready. I had to go here and here and here and here before it was right. Or I needed that 10 years to make it right now, right? So when you said that, I'm like, oh, it came around in the right time for Merle. Anyways, just a side note.
Make sure you send that to my board, right? You know, because of course I report to a board. So make sure that, you know, it's like, well, we think that Merle is great for this position. Awesome.
I'll tag
Please send that.
Leslie and everybody on the post.
right.
Merle is amazing, which you are. So, okay. In a previous episode, Lauren from the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance, I asked her about suicide, and maybe if you want to touch on that. To be honest, I'm not quite sure where I all want to go, because this is deep. This is unlike any other conversation I've had. It's beautiful. I love it. I just really want to go where this conversation needs to go. If there's somebody that has a farmer in their life and they're concerned, excuse me, maybe there's things they need to watch for. Part of my concern, give me one quick second. Oh my goodness. Frog in my throat as I go to talk about the important stuff. And it's not tears. Sometimes tears happen. I am deeply concerned about farmers. More and more every year, because as we know, if you just go on social media, and sometimes if we're watching all that, it makes it worse. I get it. But and you talk about the challenges, and that's probably a great part for you to go where you want. But I'm deeply concerned about the financial stress and the insane amount of pressure on farmers. Like, to me, and I'm probably looking at it too easy. I'll get to my point, Merle, and then you'll help me out with this. But I don't ever want a farmer to take their life because of financial stress. Like, you look at some of those farmers that are in the States and Canada, everything that's going on, they're doing their best, they're planning, they're putting all this money out, and then they look and they're like $100,000 loss. My equity's gone. What's going to happen? I'm going to lose this land. Sorry, I'm going deep. $1 million loss on this huge farm. We are so deeply entrenched in our land and our legacy and our pride. Like, to me, and I don't blame farmers, because I'm a business owner times two. So I go, our finances and our livelihood in great part are our identity. But what I don't ever want is for somebody to take their life for mere finances. So I'm not even sure where you want to pick up on that. But farmers in the audience, farmers' wives, what should we be looking for, talking about, be on the lookout for at these extra stressful times?
They are extra stressful. And you know, so we have what I call the socially acceptable things to talk about, right? When we talk about farm stress, we talk about weather, crops, prices, right? You know, so prices kind of encompasses finance, maybe, you know, tariffs and trade and labor, you know, a few of these pressures. What I know is that I know no farmer who didn't go into farming knowing that it was a stressful business, right? And so there's those stresses are there. They've always been there. I grew up in the 80s. So
Yep. Yep.
I've, we had cows during BSE.
Oh, yep.
Farm stress is a thing, right? And
Yep.
we know that. Every farmer who makes the choice to end up going in to, see a therapist, I do want to make sure. So this, one of the things that Do More Ag does is to make sure that those therapists have a good understanding of farming and that they're not saying something dumb like,
Take a holiday.
Take a 2-week holiday and leave your calving, 200 head of cattle, to do it on their own. Well, yeah. So, we appreciate, helping therapists to better understand farming so that that doesn't happen. What I know though, is that when they do start to talk, the more you ask and the more they think about it, it's usually something different. It might be finances, but really it's about what that means, right? What that means to their farm or their family. They've got a kid in university that has to take out a bunch of extra loans that they can't support. Their wife is doing whatever they're doing, driving a rattly old car, and they don't have the finances to, buy something new. They've, fixing on all their older equipment because they can't, get ahead enough to buy something new and different. Or, they're so bought into that legacy of, my great grandpa settled here and whatever, and I'm going to be the one to lose the farm. That legacy piece has a huge impact. So yes, it's the finances, but it's what those finances mean to the farm. The legacy piece is particularly hard. So there's sort of 3 layers. So those socially acceptable ones. And then there's the everyday, wear and tear of being a farmer. There's huge amounts of isolation. You're a long way from getting help. Even if you were to say, gee, I should go talk to a counselor. Well, if you've got to drive 3 hours to find one, right? That's a whole day, right?
With time for that, right?
Yeah. Okay. Who's got time for that, right? And maybe you don't have the cash on hand to pay them because, of course, counseling, right? So that's why we really love and lift up some of our partners, such as Manitoba Farmer Wellness in Manitoba, Saskag Matters in Saskatchewan, Counseling Alberta has a specific fund to help farmers, and they've got people who are trained to understand farming. There are more and more of these sorts of spaces all across Canada, and I love to see it. What I know, though, is that, so that's the second level, right? That isolation, the distance from getting help, repetitive work, long hours, not sleeping, right? So all of these sorts of things. And then there's the third level, that legacy piece. For example, maybe you're having marital trouble, right? And you're worried about the impact that that's going to have on your farm, because it does have an impact. There are cases of, we've got higher levels of drinking and drug abuse. So substance abuse in general in rural areas. This is a fact. This is a known fact. We've got higher levels of domestic violence in rural areas. Again, it's a known fact, right? The reality is, it can be messy and it can be complicated and it can be difficult. And some of those things might be happening irrespective of how well the farm's doing. You could have a farm that's doing financially on the books really well and still have people on that farm who are struggling and need help and support, right? Yes, I understand that there's those additional pressures, but if we only think about those additional pressures of, the things we can't control, we're not getting to the heart of things. And the heart of things for us at Do More Ag, one of our first logos really takes aim at the culture of farming, that tough it out culture. That tough it out culture is what's stopping people from getting help. And it's what's stopping people from recognizing when they need help. It's also what's stopping people from getting their kids help or their wife help or their husband help or their, and kind of helping those around them. Because that tough it out culture teaches us that if you can't tough it out, you're weak. Right. Yeah. So we've got a logo that's, it says tough it out, tough is crossed out, and we replace it with talk it out.
Oh yeah, right.
You need to talk it out. You need to talk it out either yourself. Go look at stuff online. Maybe you're just experiencing some anxiety and you're not sleeping. There's some really good tools out there that can help with that. Maybe you got to dig a little bit deeper and there's something else going on. Maybe you do need to go and talk to your doctor. Maybe you need to make sure that your kid goes and sees the doctor, right? Can't just, kids these days, I hear that so much, but the research is starting to show us, I know, and that there was an Ontario research that said that, rural kids are more likely than urban kids to have their first encounter with mental health side of our healthcare system, and for that to happen in an emergency room and with the RCMP involved. Right. So, and that's part of that tough it out culture. You hope it's just going to go away or resolve itself on its own. But if you're not getting your kids the help that they need early enough, out for yourself, that's part of why we work at that upstream end, right? Like we need more people to understand that this is a thing. This is a real thing. And we need more people to reach out for help earlier when it's easier to get to the heart of what's going on.
You know, I get that rural connection. Now that you're saying it just like you said it, it impacts me. So I didn't grow up on a farm. Both my parents, they grew up on farms, and then it skipped a generation and now I farm with my husband. But I loved going out to the farm, and that was our thing on the weekends. My dad was on the road trucking, so my mom would pack us up. We'd go to the farm. Little Tracy says, when I get older, I'm going to be a farmer. Turns out I'm a beef farmer. Dream fulfilled. But by way of maybe how I grew up, and I'd almost say by way of personality, and actually just the fact that I don't care what your personality is, we probably all benefit from human connection. I work from home now. I used to be on the road a lot, in Steinbach, in an office. I don't need to talk to people all the time. Believe it or not, I'm a communicator, but I'm not a big talker, but I need the energy, the presence, and the livelihood of people around me, more than my husband, more than my pets, more than my cows. So to be honest, I'm in my office space here. Quite often, I drive into Steinbach for no rhyme or reason other than to charge up my people batteries. So it's never quite connected, where maybe farmers, who thinks of doing that, right? Like I'm an oddball. I just drive to Steinbach. Of course I do errands. But I realize that my people battery is low. I don't even really need to talk to anybody. I could just sit in my truck in a parking lot and watch people. It charges up the people battery. Maybe I feel more connected to humans. I don't know what it is. I do my errands, go home, I'm good. And then I'll be working, I'll be isolated for days on end. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I need to go. I need to get my charge of people. So wow, I've never connected the dots. So many people have said that, the rural connection. And I got it a little bit, but I just connected the dots for me. Yeah.
I'm so glad. You raise a really interesting point around isolation, right? Because it's one of those signs that you could watch for, right? If you've got somebody who usually comes to Coffee Row or usually shows up to, church on Sundays, or you always see them, Wednesday night when such and so is happening or whatever. And all of a sudden you're not seeing them anymore. And you're like, that's a good time to give them a text, to give them a call. Hey, I noticed that you haven't been around. Anything, I'm here to talk. Anything going on, what's up? And another thing that when we think about those signs, when people do start to isolate themselves, another piece is actually shame. So if there's a lot of chatter in your community that, something has happened or somebody did something, maybe they are struggling financially and they haven't been able to feed their cows properly or their bison, and maybe see if the inspectors have been involved, or they got a DUI and they're feeling a lot of shame about that. Shame is a huge, huge driver that people need to be aware of. If you've got a friend that you've known for, a neighbor, whatever, and they're going through a shame spike, that's a good time for you to reach out, because they need you actually more than ever.
I'm thinking of a situation. I won't get into details for those reasons. It was a mental health thing that got involved. And then there was some severe mental health on the back end because of shame. That was, goodness, like 20 some years ago. I was too young and not even thinking about these things. Hallelujah. At that point in my life. But now that you're saying that, I mean, that's natural, right? I mean, the most outgoing of us, if we're ashamed of something, what do? If you're sad, tired, all those things, you just kind of go into yourself, stay home, and then everything,
you pull away.
Yeah, and everything gets out of context, right?
In rural communities, we're really good at showing up with casseroles if somebody's been in a car accident, or they were in the hospital for cancer or whatever, they've had a stroke. We show up, we take the crop off, we do all kinds of things. But oftentimes when it comes to mental health, we'll say, oh, They need space, and we
Mm.
push them away.
Oh,
And it's not that we mean to. Honestly, people are just like, I don't know what to say.
right. Yeah.
I'm scared to make it worse. Right? These are the sorts of things that people will say to me. That's exactly what the Do More Agriculture Foundation intends to break. We want to increase people's confidence and courage to move forward, wrap your arms around that person the same as you would around somebody who's been in a car accident or a farm family. Let them know that you still love them, you still respect them, you're going to continue to include them, they still belong in your community, they're still people that you love and enjoy, and that you will support them in whatever they need you to do. The day that we can treat people with mental illness crises or those sorts of crises the same way that we treat someone with a physical illness, that's the day that Do More Ag no longer needs to be here.
Mm. Well said. Well said. I would like to pick your brain, and I did this. I'm very um conscious of the fact that sometimes we find resources because we are on YouTube. And this came up in my episode with Colleen, and I've done it for business stuff. I'm like at my wit's end for this subject, just to kind of relate here, and I'll get to my point. I'm just so frustrated, stressed out. I get online, I find a podcast or a YouTube video, and it literally provides that relief and resources and understanding I need. Now, move this over to mental health, even more critical. If somebody's watching this, as we tend to, if we want to learn or we have this subject that we're concerned about, if you're ever concerned about somebody, I want to kind of go to those like to-dos, sort of, without getting into like a therapist role here. And we'll put resources in the show notes if anybody is in crisis that they connect. But how do we be prepared? Because I'm trying to think of that. I'm like, my goodness, I do this. Would I be courageous, look on the lookout, knowledgeable enough, brave enough to go, wait a minute, I'm just going to stop in and actually check in? Like, what do you say? Can we ever say the wrong thing? Do you want to speak about that a little bit?
We worry about saying the wrong thing. The easiest thing you can do is to keep your mouth shut and your ears open. I know that sounds kind of
Okay.
rude, but honestly, just showing up and saying, hey, I'm thinking of you, or, hey, I hear you. Things are rough right now. I'm just going to sit here beside you. Or do you want to go for a drive? We don't have to talk. I'm going to go for a drive. I got to check the cows in the pasture. Why don't you come with me? Right? Like it doesn't, you're not there to solve it, right? That's what clinicians are for, right? They're trained to do that. You're not there to solve it. You're there to make sure that they still feel like they belong and that they have worth and that you love them, right? Like that really matters. That's the piece that each of us as community members can offer. You're right. There are lots of podcasts out there. So Do More Ag has a new podcast out that we launched this past October. It's
Right
a
on.
different kind of mental health podcast because we took a look at what was out there. And there are lots of podcasts, mental health podcasts out there that, interview psychologists, interview, yoga instructors, interview, those who do forest bathing or equine therapy or all kinds of great things that help people, right? And there's a lot of those kind of podcasts, including podcasts such as the one from the National Farmers Mental Health Alliance. It's called The Rural Well. High recommend.
Right. Yeah.
There's another kind of stream of mental health podcasts out there, and they interview people who've had lived experience, right? So
Oh,
people who have bipolar disorder, people who've had PTSD, right? Or walking the path of anxiety or depression or whatever it is that their clinical diagnosis is. Because those stories matter too, because people don't always know who's out there, or they want to feel less alone, right? And so they're both excellent podcasts. That's not where we went with ours, because our mandate is specific to cultivating a culture of community, right? And to helping communities cultivate a culture. We go out, so Hey Are We Okay goes out and we interview groups or individuals that have ignited something in their community or done something in their community that can be that was meant to shift the conversation around mental health, to activate people in their community, to change the conversation, to provide safe spaces, to provide a space of connection. There's all kinds of different ones that we've had. So we've had 6 episodes drop so far, and then we're already planning season 2, and it's fabulous because we want regular people to know that there are things that they can do in this space. That it is, yes, we need clinicians, we need call lines, and we need community. That community piece, that's where Do More Ag sits.
Okay. Well done. I actually believe one of my team members puts that into our news, your episodes. I have her look. I'll double check and make sure that we're promoting for you guys as well. That sounds fantastic. Okay. Merle, is there anywhere you want to take this? I had a few more questions like awareness, stigma, what's your frustration, pet peeves? I would almost go, what drives you nuts? Your frustrations. I kind of like to do that that negative, and then in a dream world, what would mental health support look like? Do you want to take those anywhere?
So one of the things that I notice is that if you ask a farmer what causes them stress, right? Or if you ask anyone in the agriculture community what causes them stress, you will hear those socially acceptable ones that I mentioned, right? Weather, crops, prices, tariffs, and trade. And the thing is that we've got policy levers in place for most of that, right? We've got agri-stability, we've got crop insurance, we've got all kinds of policy pieces in place to try and manage those things, or we've got supply management, right? If you're dairy, right? To try and manage those are policy levers to try and even out, those highs and lows of farming, to whatever extent we can. And I hear those stories and I think, yep, I farm. I grew up on a farm. I know farming pressure. I see it every day. What I also know is that it misses all that stuff in between, right? If we draw a straight line between farm stress and suicide, we're like, it's a yes and, right? Like where's the community role? Where is the regular people role? Where's the people who actually have an illness that erupted out of nowhere, right? That had nothing to do, like they got a successful farm and they're still sick, right? Like how do we make sure that we're telling that more rounded and wholesome story? So that's something that I think about quite a lot. A piece that relates with that, Tracy, is that sometimes we can get a little bit stuck in the negative. We're farmers, right? So we get together at Coffee Row. We're not necessarily talking about the cool, fun stuff that we're up to, right? We're grumping about something, right?
That's humans generally, right?
Right?
Yeah.
What I know, though, is that if we keep telling a mental health story that paints farming as bad for your mental health, I think that we're painting ourselves into a bit of a corner, right? So one of the things at Do More Ag that we've been specifically doing is making sure that we're thinking through, what do you do for fun on your farm? What aspects of your farm life do you love? What aspects of your farm life bring you pride, bring you joy, make you smile, right? We need to make sure that we're recognizing that mental health is all sides of it. It's not just those problematic anxiety, depression. It's also happiness and joy and fun and, playing a practical joke on your kid or whatever it is that you do. And so one of the things that we've done in our Hey, Are We Okay podcast is we invite people to tell us their stories. So take your phone, open up your voice notes and tell us your story of something that you do on your farm that's just for fun, right? Maybe you restore old cars. Maybe you've got a tractor museum. Maybe you've, renovated your barn and you host like local events, people can just come and, hang out. Maybe you, I don't know. Our neighbors up the road, they built a cabin. It's literally 200 yards from their house, but it's the cabin, right? And it's in their farmyard. It's their cabin. And when they go to the cabin, they do cabin things. That's actually a more common story than I thought. There's actually a lot of farmers that have done all kinds of things. One farmer wrote in and he built a golf course. He built a 4-hole golf course on his farm. Okay, tell me about your cabin. I want to hear about it.
Funny enough, we joke in our area, there is a little lake town. It's called St. Malo. And there's people that live in town And then the lake's just to the side, like literally you could bike or walk, not even a mile. They get a cabin in town. So it's kind of a joke with St. Malo people because they like live in the lake town, but they have a cabin on the lake. So funny enough, we have a piece, like our farm is just over there to the east. And this piece of land came up where my office is. This is our cabin. This came up, we bought it because, of course, it's a neighboring piece. We sold some land further away. It's actually a log house, a log building. We bought it part for my office. That's a big reason. But now we call it the cabin. So look at me. We used to laugh at the St. Malo people that go to the cabin that live literally on cabin country. I can walk across the pasture through my cows to my house. So our cabin is on our farmland. So anyways, yeah, funny enough.
So you're going to be the next one. You're going to whip out your phone, set play on your voice app, and you're going to tell me who you are, where you farm, and tell me about your cabin. I think that's awesome. Please do.
Yeah, I love it. I want to touch on two things here quick. Are you okay for time?
Yeah, I'm good. Go ahead.
I love how you said that we're telling the negative story, and I'm big on mindset. Like, to me, that is your mindset creates your world, right? And I like that you're saying that because, yes, we can always focus on the negative, but why do we farm? All those incredible moments that you will never get not living on a farm. That is why we farm. Like going out on the quad and just sitting among like all those beautiful moments, but we maybe even take that for granted. And with the human negativity bias, all we focus on is the negative. I love that you said that. But one odd, really quick question that I want to ask you before, because I am deeply curious, like you said, or like I said before, does a mental illness just come about or are people born with it? I have to ask these things because I know I need to know, and I'm sure other people want to know. That's a question, or
yeah, well, no, it's a question for a clinician, not for me.
Okay.
Because my level of understanding is on a, I'm just a regular average person. Yeah, I've done lots of reading and actually, I'm going to do this in two pieces. Number one of the best things that you can do if you have a friend or a neighbor or family member who does develop a particular illness or an adversity of some kind, one of the best gifts that you can give them is to go do some work to learn about it. Learn about what are the symptoms? What does that look like? How can I learn? Because all it does is that it makes the distance between you and that person way smaller.
Bridge.
So that it's a bridge, and you're creating, like, it's way easier to create a bridge when the piece between you is really small, right? So make that piece as small as you can. And I say this, Tracy, because my own learning, particularly around bipolar disorder, which is what my father and my brother had, is that there is a genetic component to it, right? And so what it is that there's a genetic component that at some point in your life, you could have something, whether it's you're in a car accident and it sort of, activates things, but something may or may not happen that this erupts. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something big. It can be like you could hit your head playing hockey, right? It could be something really small that just, moves things inside you just enough to activate it. And so my understanding is that there can be a biological component. I know that my friend Loren Van Uwijk, who you mentioned, who leads the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance, we're colleagues. I just saw her this weekend. And Loren talks about that there is a genetic component even to anxiety. Farmers tend to actually be hardwired towards a higher level of anxiety. And again, it comes down through that generational piece, right? So there is some genetic components to this. And I say this because stuff can erupt when you don't expect it. And it can erupt in a huge way. And if you live rural and all of a sudden something erupts, that distance, all of a sudden your distance from help, your recognition of what's going on, right? If you don't even have the words to know what's happening in your house or with your neighbor or with yourself, it slows you down from getting help because you're not sure exactly what's going on. So yeah, that's the long-winded to a simple question. Is there a genetic component? Most of the research that I've read, I believe that there is.
Thank you.
Not in every case.
That. Yeah, I'm glad I asked because I'm always curious and I'm sure people are too. And part of talking about this and understanding it is maybe those weird little questions that I just asked. To me, those are the important ones, right? Like, can it just happen or do we always happen? Does something trigger it? That's great.
Yeah.
That is
I
great.
don't like
Thank
to
you.
think about triggers so much because then people are
Okay.
like, oh, if I would have just stopped that one thing, it's like, well, yeah, but if that didn't trigger it, something else a year later might
Okay.
have, right? Like,
Okay.
we really don't always know. And I love to see more research happening in these spaces. I think it's fantastic, from that clinical side. Yeah, we're already in a different place than we were 50 years ago.
Yeah, totally. Looping back to the front of the conversation where we said if people are tired of hearing about it and talking about it, we've done our job in that context, right? So that's great. That's to be celebrated. So way to go, do more egg and everybody involved. Yay.
And all the
That's
other colleagues across Canada, absolutely.
yeah, so many great people do more egg and all the associations. And
Yeah.
as I'm chit-chatting with you, I'm also thinking of ways that I can further the conversation, more episodes, but a page within our website where I can put mental health resources and episodes. So I'm kind of like, if you ever catch up one person that just wants to learn more and binge mental health, right? To just really get into it. So okay, so the challenges, the stigma, focusing on the positive. I love that. And focusing on the positive. What are you excited about? What does a dream world look like? You kind of answered that. Take that where you want to with final parting words.
You know, the better you know yourself, the easier your world becomes.
Mm,
And so for quite a long time, it was a big step for me to think of myself as a farmer. Even though I've always been, part of a farm, I've never not been part of a farm. I'm the youngest child. I'm the only girl, right? If dad put me on a tractor, man, he was scraping the bottom of the barrel, right? Like,
yep.
so, and yet there's other things about farming that is central to who I am and how I think about the world, right? I think about it in terms of seasonality. People want to have a mental health conference in September. I'm like, yeah, no,
Yeah.
no, 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 I'm busy, but thank you. So, I think in terms of seasonality, I spent my lunch hour paying farm bills, like it's folded into everything that I do. And I'm more than a farmer, and so are all the other farmers that I know. You, for example, right? You're a farmer, you're a media personality, right? Like you're both. And it's not an either or, it's a yes and. And so I'm learning to embrace the other aspects of who I am and what I do. And so I'm in addition to being a farmer, I'm an author, I'm a historian, right? So that's an important part, and a mental health advocate. So those three kind of areas of my life, finding ways to braid them all together. And that's why I Do More ends up being a good place for me to be. What I'm looking forward to going forward is that more positive conversation. I really want to tell the stories of the people who need to hear, so that people hear them, so that people feel that they're not alone, so that people feel that they have a role to play. That's like, oh, well, I'm not trained, I can't have this conversation. It's like, you know what? There's all kinds of training you can take. If you're interested in helping the people around you, there's peer support training, there's mental health first aid, there's training specific to suicide, assist or safe talk. There's all kinds of training that have been developed and beautifully developed in the last 10 to 15 years and widely available. And some of that training has been sort of tweaked so that it makes sense in a rural context. There's all kinds. If you've got a library in your little rural community, and you go take a look at the shelf in the library that relates to mental health, and those books were published in the 1990s, maybe that's a good opportunity to raise $1,000 and get some new books for your library, because you don't know who's using the library to access information, right? So that's something that a community can do, right? Are all of your firemen, your volunteer fire guys, your EMTs, are all of them trained in mental health so that they've got the techniques and the confidence? What about your clergymen? If they've taken it, right? Because they're oftentimes the first port in a storm, right? So there's lots that each of us can do to raise our levels of courage and confidence in this space.
Oh, I love it. Merle, this has been a beautiful conversation. Thank you for sharing your experience and all this information. I just love that you're willing to go deep on this conversation. So thank you so much.
You're more than welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. I will put all the links to whatever we discussed in the show notes. And if you guys want to learn more, head over to Do More Ag website and connect with Merle if you're interested. Are you okay with that, Merle?
Absolutely. I'd love to hear from anyone who's interested.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Merle. And thank you guys in the audience. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.